So Jeff, you've got a little presentation for us, I think, that
Yes.
we're going to follow.
Yeah, we're prepared.
Maybe. Here it comes. Yay. So we're talking about how to take notes during a playtest. And I think, Jeff, you were going to lead off the first part of the topic. Was that right? Or are we just introducing ourselves first? I think we're introducing ourselves. Alrighty. Well, as I mentioned, I'm Kat Dreyer. I'm a game designer and illustrator, and our first game through Dreyer Inc. is BubbleNet, which we're hoping to release this year. And I am also co-host of the Meeple Syrup Show with Senfung Lim. Jeff.
Yeah. So I've designed a bunch of games. My two most recent ones are Super Skill Pinball. Well, Expanse is not most recent, but popular. And also a whole series of books, including Building Blocks of Tabletop Game Design, which is an encyclopedia of mechanisms. So that's a little bit about us. And I just, before we get started, well, first, Kat, thanks for having me here, but also, I just want everyone to be so impressed with how prepared we are for this presentation. It's almost like we sat down and took notes before we made some notes before we started this. So the first question when you're doing playtesting is that I like to ask myself, or if I'm sitting down to playtest somebody else's game, is what is the purpose of this playtest? Because not all playtests are created equal. So it's very important to go into a playtest with specific questions that you're trying to get answered. Now, that doesn't mean that you're going to ignore everything else, but it does mean that there are certain things you want to focus on, and it also is going to impact what you're looking for, maybe how you teach it, or things of that nature. So are you just interested in how easy it is to play? Are you interested in the balance of if there's one power faction or whatever that's going to be overpowered? Are you looking for fun? Is it a late play test? Is it an early play test? All those things are going to kind of change and frame how you approach the play test. So Kat, other types of play tests that or questions that you ask at this phase?
A lot of those things are things that I try and communicate to whoever I'm working with. So if I'm the designer leading the playtest, I try and make sure that I frame it really carefully. Like, I designed this game last week. This is the first time I put it in front of a person, or I've been working on this for 5 years, and we're just doing some final touches. And the good thing about that is it gives people an idea of what kind of feedback you're looking for from them immediately, and how receptive you're likely to be to feedback as well. So it's quite useful at that point to also say what you're trying to get from people. So because the people taking notes during these playtests, they're the designers, but they're also the playtesters. So that if they know what they're looking for, they know what kinds of notes they want to be taking, what kinds of things they want to be thinking about, so they can give you good feedback at the end.
Yeah, that's particularly important. And when you're playing with the other designers, because, they, when you go to Unpubs or Metatopias or things like that, right? Most of the people you're playing with are also designers, and there's nothing that designers love more than redesigning your game.
Yes.
So if you don't want them to do that, it's a very good idea up front to say, look, this is really close to being locked. We're just, we're just nibbling around the edges here. So that kind of stuff is important.
Another thing that's really useful when you're at the start of a playtesting session, if you're a playtester and you've got a reasonably new designer, is to actually help them frame this themselves. A lot of new designers are so nervous and so worried about putting their baby in front of people, and this was very recent for me, so I'm speaking from very recent experience, that they don't necessarily remember that they are running this session and that it's up to them to make sure that they get the information they need. So if you're experienced, you can help them a lot by just helping them frame what they need and asking the questions that maybe they haven't learnt to ask yet.
Absolutely. And so this isn't specifically about taking notes. I mean, whether you take notes or don't take notes, however you do it, this is important to kind of establish kind of the whole tone of what you're trying to do, and might influence the way that you're kind of taking notes.
Cool. So the types of notes that you might take, I mean, obviously, when we say take notes, we think of writing things down. which is the kind of thing that I often do when I'm preparing for things. I don't necessarily ever refer to those again. Sometimes they're just things that I have used to get my brain in the right place, and I've given myself a jumping off point. Sometimes they're things that I want to be sure that I'm going to actually touch on. So, for example, this presentation is a form of notes that we prepared beforehand that allows us to make sure that we cover the things we need to cover. And that's something you can do to have a really nicely structured and reassuring playtest. But there are other ways of taking notes too, such as taking photographs or videos or audio recordings, bearing in mind, of course, that you want to make sure you have the permission of everyone involved before you do those.
So hidden cameras. It's all about hidden cameras.
Absolutely hidden cameras. That's why I always have these glasses on. How are you doing, Jeff? No, I do think it is really important, though, because people don't necessarily realize when you're taking photos or videos or things like that, that you may be using them the way I do as content so that you can actually get better usage out of that. Because as a game designer these days, you do actually have to spend a lot of time self-promoting as well as designing and everything else you have to do.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about written notes. Jeff, what kinds of written notes do you find useful?
I'm not a detailed note taker. And that goes back to my school days as well, for better or for worse. But there's definitely some things that I will jot down. And again, this goes back to what I'm looking for out of a playtest. But one thing I always write down, because I always forget in kind of the heat of battle, right at the very beginning, is the time that the playtest started. Because one of the things I'm usually tracking is how long it takes the players to play it. Because I want to make sure I don't lie too badly on the back of the box about how long the game is. But also, there's certain durations of the game that I'm aiming for, and I just want to get a feel for how we're shooting in that. And a lot of times, it's surprising. You'd think like, oh yeah, I'll remember about how long this playtest was, but then you're in there and you're watching your folks, and you're like, oh, did we start at 1 or did we start at 120, or when did I finish teaching the rules, or what is it? So I always jot that right at the top of my piece of paper. I don't have I know some people like to have forms for themselves and stuff like that, and that's fine. More power to you. I just usually just have a little notebook that I'll just scribble in and just write on a blank piece of paper. So that's the first thing I'll write down is the time always. And then, other information that I think I may not remember after the test, like scores that each player had and stuff like that. If I'm at that point, if I'm very early in a cycle of a game, I don't care what people's scores were. That's not what I'm focusing on. I'm focusing on the core mechanics. But if I'm in that later balance phase, I'll try to get just some basic statistical information about that. And then just any observations I have, particularly if I'm like at a big con, where I'm going to be testing my own stuff repeatedly and a lot of other people's stuff. I'll try to take more detailed notes, because you forget. I forget faster. If I'm just doing one play test and that's all I'm doing, and then I'm going home after that, then I won't be it's easier for me to kind of go back later and kind of jot down my notes and what things I may want to focus on next.
That also changes with experience, I think, and how well you know that particular game. So I've noticed that for me, it depends a lot on the weight of the game that I'm working on. So these are taking notes when I'm testing my own games. The weight of the game, the stage of development, who else is in the design team with me, what state I'm in personally. So talking about, am I at a convention? Is it very noisy? Is it very busy? Is it 2 a.m.? What sort of resources I've got around me for taking the notes. Like, do I actually have my notebook, or is this impromptu? The other ways that I could be taking the notes, like which ones are the most likely from my perspective to be useful. I sometimes find when I'm actually writing things down that I'm so busy concentrating on writing that I miss what happens next. And I've noticed a few times that what happens next was actually the most useful thing, because I often also record my sessions and I see myself writing and I hear the thing I missed. So what I generally do now is I use my camera. So I take a photo at the very start, which tells me when I started setting up. I take a photo after I've finished teaching, so that tells me how long my teach was. I take a photo at the end of the game for sure to show what the end state was, so I don't have to worry about recording scores. I can see where things got to, but also it gives me those times, and it gives me the way that the game has developed. And then apart from that, I tend to just randomly take photos of like what's going on, or oh no, I made a typo on this card, or wow, I've never seen anyone do that before, all those sorts of things. And then the thing that I do to record it is I actually post it on my Facebook with some comments about it, usually reasonably quickly afterwards. And it's not the full thing, but it's generally enough for the way that my brain works. So I use a combination of those things, but generally not a lot of written notes. If it's a heavier game, I use my wonderful husband, George, to come along and be note taker so I can focus entirely on running the playtest, and we swap places on that when it's his game.
Yeah, that's I'd never thought about using photos as timestamps. That's interesting.
Super useful. Super useful, because you forget, right? Like you get to the point where, you know, someone will start talking when you're about to write whatever it is down. But if my pattern is that I'm always taking a photo at the start, taking a photo when I finish teaching, taking a photo at the end of the game, that I can always do.
Yeah. By the way, one thing we forgot to mention is you know, we obviously have a presentation here, but feel free to jump in with questions.
So yes, please.
Type
We'd
them
love
into
that.
the chat. We love questions. Otherwise, you know, we'll just drone on for an hour and nobody wants that.
Maybe they do, Jeff. Maybe they do. Maybe that's what they're here for. Maybe they're having trouble sleeping and they just need us to talk them to sleep.
That could be. Little
we
ASMR
can tell you stories, folks, if
action.
that's what you need. So I think we've covered the types of notes in general. I know that people also sometimes do verbal notes. So I've seen people kind of like take their phone and just talk into it afterwards, which I think is quite a clever way of doing it. Or like voice to text and things like that. So there are a lot of different reasons that people aren't comfortable writing. And sometimes I've seen people fully with laptops typing away while they're running their test. Like all of these are valid if they work for you.
One kind of overarching tip, I think most of us kind of do this just generally, but you know, if at all possible, don't play in the game. You know, you just want to be an observer, and you know, and it's very difficult to do that if you're also playing and trying to make your moves and see what's going on. So I mean, sometimes you just need to round it out, player count, but you know, if at all possible, you want to sit out. Yes. Just in terms of videos, just touching on that, I guess you said you've taken video. I've never done video play tests or recorded play tests like that. I know I saw a presentation given, gosh, probably about 2018 by Rob Davio and Matt Leacock. They were talking about the development of Pandemic Legacy. And one thing I found really fascinating and that they were totally swore by during the development is they, when they got to the end, particularly because of the legacy game aspects of it, is they needed to have the same group play the game over and over again. And they didn't want it to happen. They didn't want to influence the playtest. I mean, just the designer just kind of being there is always going to kind of tweak things a little bit, and I guess we'll talk a little bit later if it's a little out of scope, but you know how much you kind of correct people when they make mistakes and stuff like that. But they really very clearly wanted to see like what mistakes people were making, what things confused them, where they were having fun, stuff like that. And the way that they did it is, you know, if you wanted to play test it, first off, you had to, you know, promise that you would go through the entire 12 months, but also that you know, you would do a video recording at home. They were not there. They just sent you the box at your house or store or wherever it was. You would play through and you would use your phone or other recording device to record the entire playthroughs. And then they watched every single one of those specifically to identify, you know, areas of rules where people were having problems and what they were misinterpreting and, you know, where people were making mistakes during play, which can be just so difficult to get that same experience, because most of the time when we play test, we're teaching the game and we're not just handing a rule book to the players and letting them teach themselves, which Absolutely. Is such an important step.
The other thing that you miss a lot of the time, particularly if you're playing, but even just in general, if you're running a playtest, is you don't necessarily see the body language of the player who's not active right now. And one of the big sort of buzzwords that a lot of people throw around is downtime. I love downtime. to a certain extent. I love having time to process and strategize. I hate having to constantly be like, oh, it's my turn, oh, it's my turn, oh, it's my turn, because I worry that I'm slowing the game down because I haven't had time to process. But a lot of people really, really hate having to sit around for too long between turns. And when you're running the playtest, you don't necessarily notice that. But when you watch your video afterwards, you go, oh, wow, everyone else was on their phone. There were people who actually literally turned their backs on the table, all of these sorts of things. There is too much space between my turns, or there's not enough engagement when someone else is playing to keep people interested. What levers can I move? So that's also really useful, because as just one person, especially if you've got like a 6-player game, you cannot mind everyone and go, oh, are you okay? Is everyone all right? Like, it's not like you're hosting a party and checking their drinks fill. You know, you're going, so you've got to focus on what's happening on the table. The video gives you that really big advantage.
Yep. Excellent point. Okay.
So yeah, that kind of does follow on with what to look for during the test in a way, doesn't it? What sorts of things do you look for, Jeff?
We've already kind of touched on it. The number one thing I look for is body language. I want to see, are the players engaged? What are they confused about? What are they enjoying? You know, like you said, are they on their phones, etc. You know, I mean, that to me is so super important. Yeah, honestly, you know, I usually, you know, mechanically, I usually know what's going on in a game. I kind of understand the balance for the most part. Maybe I make a few tweaks, or you know, occasionally somebody will do a strategy that I never saw coming that just totally breaks things. That doesn't happen as often. Most of the time, when I'm, you know, that body language is so important. That's why personally, again, a teeny bit off topic, but personally, I find it super tough to play test on Tabletop Simulator and other online platforms, because you completely, or almost completely, lose that entire body language channel. You don't know if people are engaged and really looking at the screen and going around and look at the cards and stuff like that, or if they're, you know, off playing, you know, Slay the Spire in the background or whatever. It's very, very difficult to get. You'll see people play, and maybe you'll understand what they're tripping up on or what rules they're not getting, but you just lose so much information. So that to me is the super important thing I'm looking for while the game is being played. Even more important, because even when it's over, if you like ask people, hey, did you like it? Would you want to play it again? What'd you think? A lot of times I've had people tell me, oh, that was awesome, I loved it. And I know that I can tell. I can tell they weren't having fun. You know?
Yeah, that's great. Anyway, I've got to keep going. Yeah. I mean, one of the other things that I look for, it's partly body language, but it's also it's the engagement with the game through the way that they actually interact with the components. Like during the bits between the turns, are they going, oh, cool, look at this little duck? Or because I just happen to have a little duck in front of me, or whatever. Are they like, wow, this is really interesting. I'm enjoying this, or they're reading their cards, or those sorts of things, or are they just off with the fairies? And it's really hard to tell that, again, testing online, which is why, apart from not liking the online platforms in general, I have issues with those because they give me migraines. I'm also missing the thing that I love about tabletop, which is that we're playing with a physical game on top of the table. And we're seeing how our players are interacting with those pieces, with the graphic design of the cards. Like, you can tell when someone's frowning at a card, but they're not going to tell you that on Tabletop Simulator. And you can't see that they've just zoomed in. You can't see any of the things that they're doing. And so you miss a lot of information that you get almost instinctively when you're sitting there at the table with them. Like, oh, yeah, okay, everyone's having trouble reading that card. But they may not even realize they need to tell you that.
So are there other things that you're looking for during playtest?
The main things I'm looking for are the things that I want them to feel. So if someone's like, if they sit down and they immediately go, oh my God, I love the way this looks, I'm like, yes. But that's not necessarily the whole experience I want them to have. So I'm looking for reflections in their comments and their behavior that sort of follow the arc of the experience I want them to have. So if they're like, yeah, I got you, then I'm like, yes, you had that experience. But if it's meant to be like a chilled out, happy little game and they're busy going, ah ha ha at each other, I'm like, oh, What did I do to create this environment that isn't what I meant? So that I'm looking for that kind of thing. Like, does the experience I'm watching my players have match the experience that I was trying to portray? And do I have any like mismatches, I
Yeah.
suppose, between what I'm trying to achieve in my vision and what I'm seeing people actually doing?
Yeah. And we're going to talk about this more a little bit later, but, certainly so much of this stuff is group dependent too. It's hard to draw those kind of conclusions from a single play test a lot of times.
Yes.
I back when we were doing Space Cadets, I mean, I remember we had back-to-back play tests. We had one, same thing with Dragon and Flagon. We had, I had a play test that just went phenomenally. The people had like the best time of their lives. And then, an hour later we'd come back and we do another play test, and didn't change anything, but it was just like, it was just death, and it was just horrible, and everyone was miserable and couldn't wait for it to end. And it's just, there's so much of that alchemy that the players bring to the
Yeah.
table. And, but you got to understand that your game's not going to be for everybody, and, why, and then try to go back and say, why did this group enjoy it? And why didn't this group enjoy it? Did they like get slammed really early on in a cooperative game and they felt hopeless, or, what turn was, did there just have to be one person that just wasn't engaged and that kind of did it for everybody, or whatever. And a lot of that stuff can be hard as a designer to fix, right? It's just like, the group works. If the group doesn't, the group doesn't.
Yeah, that's one of the things I also look for. I know we're about to talk about during feedback, but one of the things I look for there is during the game, I look at the style of play the person seems to be using and their familiarity with a lot of what's going on. And often during feedback, one of the things that I try and look for or try and get out of them is what kind of a gamer they see themselves as being, which isn't necessarily the kind of gamer they actually are. But you'll get people who say, "Oh, this is my first time ever playtesting a game." Ah, okay, cool, good, thank you. You're expecting something different from my, Generation 2 prototype. So this is a weird experience for you. Or, oh, I'm a war gamer and I love really complicated, cascading effects and all kinds of things. And then you're sitting here playing my 10-minute chilled out little game about whales. I see why you're mad.
Yes.
And so
No
some of that
harpoons
I try
included.
and
Sorry.
like, that's part of framing it beforehand as well, like making sure that the person who's sitting down is in the right headspace to play it. But during the feedback, I also look for those sort of indicators of why they're happy or why they're not happy that might not be related to the game. And so that's another thing I often note is, Wargamer hated it.
Right.
All those sorts of things, so that I can remember in my head, it's not my fault. This isn't their kind of game. Or Wargamer loved it. What did I do? How did that connect? I didn't expect that. So yeah, those are the sorts of things that I look for in those cases as well.
Okay. So we have a question. Do you do any pre-vetting of people who offer to sit down? Ask them when you bring in playtesters, or do you kind of turn away playtesters, I guess, based on their experience, or at least try to tell them, hey, maybe this game isn't for you, or things like that?
Me? No.
Sure.
I do explain to people what kind of game it is. And I watch their body language. But generally, because most of my games that I playtest in these contexts are short games, the main objection people have is how long a game is. So the first thing I'll tell them is, this is a 10-minute game, takes about, 5 or so minutes to teach. It's not very strategic. It's very lightweight. Does this sound like something you'd like to play? And that's sort of the pre-vetting. If they choose that they want to, so they self-include themselves into the group that wants to try that, that's cool. If they're like, oh no, I'm looking for a more strategic game that takes, an hour or two to play, then I'm like, well, great. If you want to sit down and play it, it's only 10 minutes. If you don't, I'm not offended.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever actually like told somebody like, no, we don't want you playing this. I mean, the problem is first off, most of a lot of the playtesting events, you can't, it's hard to get playtests in to begin with. And so it's tough to be choosy. I'd rather get a playtest in with less ideal people than not get a playtest in at all with a lower play count that I'm looking for. Also, at a lot of these conventions, people get assigned to it, or they'll just go and they'll like Metatopia near my house here. They do have a system where people will just get tickets, and they'll sign up for it. They'll read the description of what the game is. Or first exposure at Gen Con, it's more of a kind of almost like a random assignment kind of a thing. So it's based on description, you can at least narrow it down. So it's tough. Usually as a designer, the people come and you go. You just don't have that luxury. Certainly, if it's just among my friends and I'm trying to get a group together, I will try to pick the people where I think this game is kind of their jam. Sometimes that helps, but it's unfortunately we don't have that luxury as much. And same thing like this. I'm often jealous of video games where they can post a game and they'll get like 1,000 people playing it, and then they can tweak a little variable and get 1,000 people playing it again. Here, you play a game once or twice and then you're trying to, and then you change it, and off of very incomplete information, so it can be difficult. So
I think I have almost never turned people away when they came over to try and play one of my games. I think the only times I've done that are when we've sort of discussed whether it's the kind of game they feel like playing and they've said no. So it hasn't exactly been me turning them away.
Yeah.
Or when they've had like a handful of food or something like that, in which case, again, I'm not turning them away. I'm just asking them if they could please finish their food before they, a messy burger or something like that. I was just like, look, this is really not appropriate. I would rather you didn't.
Prototype, yeah.
Yeah, but during play, I have a couple of times said, okay, well, thanks so much. That's all I'm going to need from you. Not exactly like that, but in this sort of, all right, that'll do kind of situation, because it's really clear this is not the right game for them and everyone's having a bad time. But I'm getting much better at making sure that situation doesn't happen now.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the feedback then. So the playtest is over, and you took your picture to note the time and the scores at the end. So I know a lot of people like to have like a questionnaire that they'll give to players, or kind of a more structured way of collecting feedback at the end of the playtest. Is that something that you do, Kat, or it's more just what kind of discussions do you like to have after the game, and how do you kind of structure it?
So generally what I tell people at the very start of the playtest is what we're going to do is we're going to play this game, and then afterwards we're going to have a feedback session. Here are some bits of paper if you'd like to write things down during the game, but unless you're stuck on something, I would appreciate it if we can talk about it at the end so that we can keep the flow of the game going. And then at the end, I tell people clearly, what we're going to do is go around the table and give each person a chance to just give their initial thoughts. And we'll just let each person finish what they're saying and have a full chance to talk. And then I will ask a couple of questions, and then we can have some open discussion. So I try and keep it very structured to make sure everyone has space to talk, because otherwise you end up with people who have things to say who never get a chance to say them, or who are always saying them last and feel like it's already been covered. And so you can miss information. And then once I've done all of that, I finish with my question that I always ask, which is, how would you describe this game to a friend? And I make it clear to them that I'm not there. So they're not trying to impress me with it or anything like that. I'm just asking them, like, in your own words, in any way you like, how would you describe this to a friend? And I get the most interesting feedback, I think, from that question.
So what do you do with that type of feedback, that last one? What is that? How is that guiding you?
So first of all, it tells me, does this game align with what I think this game is? So if I've made, again, a happy little game about whales, and they're like, yeah, it's this awesome game where you get to like smash your friends and stop them from getting fish. And I'm like, oh no, that's not what I thought it was. The second thing that I get from that is how people describe it mechanically. So which kind of mechanical words, which kind of thematic words they use to talk about. Have they seized on what the game is about? And thirdly, I start to build up how to describe my game from a marketing perspective on my sell sheets, finding the hook, what the back of the box should say, all that kind of thing, simply from just this this constant buildup of all of these people telling me how they would describe it to someone. So when I get a really good sentence, I'll write that down word for word, but otherwise I just build up this feeling of how
Yeah.
people will describe it.
Okay.
What do
Yeah,
you do?
that's interesting. I don't have. Yeah, I don't use questionnaires. I don't like them. I mean, I know some people that have like, rate this, they give people a whole thing, rate this, all these different characteristics from 1 to 5, easy to learn and stuff like that. I'm not sure what people do with that data. At my office, we have a thing when everybody comes up and says, oh, we should, collect this statistic or, keep track of this. I'm like, why?
Yeah.
What are you going to do with that? And I'm not sure what people kind of do with that, or if at some point they decide they're done with it, the game's done because now it's got a 7.8 instead of a 7.6 or something. I don't know.
The analysis of that information, like you need to be asking the questions correctly in order to get the information that you think that you're getting. So
yeah, I like to go around and, like you do, like, I mean, I don't have that. I like that question. That's it. I'm going to try that the next time.
yeah,
I
everyone's
do this.
welcome to use that one.
But it's, I want to get, feedback, but like I said, a lot of times it's at, people sometimes sugarcoat it. People think it sound better than, whatever. Or I like to ask them specifically, like, what did you find confusing? I always like to ask that question, or what kind of tripped you up when you first saw it. And, I like to ask the question, would you want to play this game again, or why or not? Or if you played it again, what would you do differently is maybe sometimes a better way to ask it. But again, just trying to, get other ideas. I usually don't ask for specific, like, what would you change, or things like that. I ask it more in the way of like, what are you confused about, or stuff like that.
I tend to follow up what they say. So if someone says, oh, I had a lot of trouble understanding how I was supposed to use this card, I'll ask them to tell me more about that. And the really important thing is that it's not an attack on my card or my game. So what I'm trying to do is identify a problem. And it's really easy to take that personally when they're like, oh, this card was really stupid. I hated it. You're like, oh, well, so it made you feel how? Oh, it made me feel really frustrated. Okay, so why do you think it was frustrating? Like, what were you trying to achieve that this card was stopping you from doing? And eventually you find out that actually it's because they hadn't understood that they could, use a different thing or something like that. And so it's my teach that's wrong, or the card wording isn't clear enough, or
Right.
And you don't realize that that's actually the problem if you just go, oh, don't be mean about my card.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and the big piece of advice I would give during this feedback phase is don't argue with the feedback. Right. I mean,
That's so hard.
I've had, but
right?
I've had games where, I've given feedback, to somebody, and they're like, no, you're misinterpreting it, or you played it wrong, and, or you could do this or this or this. Right. And eventually I will usually say, look, who are you trying to you're not going to convince me that I really liked the game, even though I didn't like, it's like, you're not trying to change my mind. You're not going to change my mind, or whatever it is. I mean, this is the feedback, take it or leave it. So, if somebody comes in, they say something like, this card is stupid, or this card was really underpowered. And I watched and played and, watched them play and realized, that they just didn't realize the way it could be used, for example, right? That it's for this, or it's for a specific situation, or they didn't realize it could be comboed with this other thing, right? I'm not going to go back. I don't even bother to go back to them and say, oh, well, you should have played this card in this thing, because I'm not trying to convince them that they like the game. But what I would take from that is, oh, it's not clear in the card. It's not visible enough to the players that this is how it should work. So
yes,
either they're not incentivized enough for it. Maybe I don't give enough points for it, that it doesn't attract their attention, which I've had in some games, and I've done it, where something a little more complicated strategy does it. Or I realize that a strategy is more complicated, and so maybe on subsequent plays it's going to come in, which is fine. Which is another problem, because play tests almost always are the same people, the different people playing it for the first time, every single time. You don't get feedback over the third, fourth, fifth, which is why I got really annoyed when my kids went to college and I lost all my play testers that I could just, where
How
we could
dare
just
they?
sit down and do them. Yeah, it was very disappointing.
It's
And they
very
made me pay
selfish.
for it, which was also really upsetting.
Oh, look. That's just compounding the
um,
insult, really.
but don't argue with the playtesters. I have been sitting very uncomfortable playtesters where, like, I've been involved in the argument, but the designer is literally like yelling at the playtester that they don't get it, they don't understand. They didn't. The playtesters and the playtesters. It was a card game, and if you played Hearts, but there's like in Hearts, so you can shoot the moon, right? Where you can
Mm-hmm.
just try to do this special thing, and one of the players tried to shoot the moon and failed, and felt that it was over, wasn't balanced, or was too hard to do, or was impossible to do, or something. And the designer just got into this huge argument with him for the next 15 minutes about whether it could be done or couldn't be done. It's like, that's not
Oh,
why you're there. So stay away from that.
yeah.
Yeah.
The difficulty with that sometimes, especially when you're quite new or your designer's quite new, is that you can start off by thinking that what they're actually asking you to do is to sort of have a conversation about it. That's how it's happened to me every time. I've thought that they've been saying, oh, I didn't really get how this worked. And so I'm like, oh, it works like this. And this is what I'm trying to achieve with it. What do you think I should do to try and make that a bit clearer for you? Which to me seems like a reasonable thing to say. But somehow, when you start in that conversation, then they start telling you how you should design your whole game, and suddenly someone's on the back foot, someone's angry, and you've got to fight. And that, I think, is the really difficult thing as a reasonably new designer, to
Yeah.
figure out, like, is this a person I want to engage about this, and is this the topic that I want to turn into the center of this conversation? Otherwise, hey, thanks so much, that was really useful. Do you mind, if I contact you to discuss this further at a later date, if that's what you want to do? Or else, like, cool, I think that what you're saying is this, have I captured that correctly? Great, let's move on.
Yeah. That's excellent way of putting it. Yeah. Just take it in, say thank you, and go from there.
And I think one of the things I've really struggled with while I was learning to process feedback like this is they're not trying to hurt you, even when they're saying, like, oh, I give really blunt, harsh feedback, and they're very proud of themselves for that. Or I'm going to destroy your game, or any of those really violent sounding expressions that a lot of people use. They are there trying to help you make your game better generally. And so if what you can do is you can actually step back and pretend that you're presenting someone else's game, and that you're getting the information to pass on to someone else, it can really help to give you the distance to survive those types of playtests. So that's just my little bit there.
Yep.
If you get sensitive, like, you don't have to develop a thick skin, but you can have other strategies so that you don't feel it.
Yeah. And we've all had these play tests that just go horribly wrong. And you just like I said, I've had them back to back. I've had back to back fantastic play tests and lousy play tests. So, you can't let it get under your skin. It's just, this thing's going to happen. It's everything's a learning experience. You just got to, take it and move on, and, kind of trust your judgment and your gut. And most importantly, your vision of what you want the game to be. We'll go talk about that
And
in a little
that's
bit.
another good thing about what to look for during your feedback as well. Is it aligning with what you like, the feedback you're hearing? Is it what you're
Right.
expecting?
Exactly. Okay, so you've got your notes, you got your videos, you got your photographs. So what do you do with them? So this is a classic kind of iterative loop. So the play testing in this case is sort of the observing. But what do you do with that? So according to sort of a standard, what's called an OODA loop structure is observe, orient, decide, and act. So the next step is orienting, which is absorbing that information. So, I took all my notes, I did this. So what is it actually telling me? What feedback do I get that really kind of gets to the core of what I'm trying to do? What's extraneous and doesn't really matter? And what do I want to do? Then that's that decide step. So this is kind of analyzing the information, what it's pointing to, then decide what you're going to change, what you may want to change. And then of course, acting is the actual, going in and updating your prototype, or, changing values on cards and stuff like that. So, this is a pretty classic loop, but I find that sometimes it's just, people do the act part before they do the
Yes.
orient part, and it early on, it's okay to kind of, jump through that, to kind of skip that a little bit because you're making bigger swings and stuff like that. But, in general, take a deep breath, let it sit for a little bit. Now, I have done, and we didn't talk about this a little bit, this is not really about taking notes, but about playtesting in general. Particularly in early stage playtests, if I'm really close to publication, I'm not going to do something unless it's like really unclear. But feel free to just like change the game in the middle of the game.
Yeah.
Jump if a card's like super underpowered or overpowered, just get in there with your pen and just cross things out and change it.
Yeah.
I do
This
that
is with
all the
10
time.
points
And
now.
just
Yeah.
Yep,
Yeah.
exactly.
I mean, the playtest is such a precious amount of time, and someone is gifting this time to you. And if you can see that that playtest is not going in the direction that you want it to be going, and that the game isn't doing what you want it to be doing, why not try changing something? Especially if it's something really obvious, like, oh yeah, that card that I just added in is not doing the thing it's supposed to do. I'm taking it out.
Yep.
The rule changes this.
Designer change. Yep.
It's
canonical.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, that kind of stuff feels, when you're new, it feels like, oh no, I owe these people the whole game. We have to play from start to finish. I mustn't change anything because I don't want to confuse anyone. Yes, those are all really considerate and nice things to think about. But actually, you owe these people good use of their time. You owe them a playtest where they feel like they're actually doing something useful instead of going over and over something that everyone knows is broken.
And I think what you said earlier is spot on, that, the playtesters they're coming 99% of the time, they're coming into this with a collaborative spirit that they're here to help you, right?
Yes.
They're not coming in with like, here I am, entertain me. That's not what it is. It's more, I am here to, bring my thoughts, bring my experiences and help you. And so, take advantage of that in a positive way by, tweaking the game and do it. If you have a chance to make a change right there, then do it. Or if you want to, if a game could end, just say reset. We're just going to stop the game now. We've been playing for 5 or 10 minutes. Obviously this isn't working. Let's reset and try it again. Be respectful of people's time, but it's fine to do that. Don't feel like, like you were saying, that you just locked into, you have to do this death march.
Yes. Yeah.
And feel free to stop the playtest early even and just start you don't have to play to the end point if you've gotten what you need to get.
Yeah, and that is one of the things you don't realize you can do. You can stop a playtest. You can just stop.
Yeah.
You can actually just stop. Like, you don't even have to reset. You don't even have to keep going. You can just go, I've got what I need. I need to process this and make some updates. I can't do them fast enough for this right now. Thanks everyone so much. Let's move to feedback. Mm-hmm. Like, you can just do that. That was like this total revelation for me the first time I saw someone do that. I was like, we've only been playing for 10 minutes. You said this was an hour-long game. What's happened? Oh, well, I discovered this. I'm like,
yeah.
Oh, so yeah, it's right there. It's something you can do.
The other tip I meant to mention, and I forgot, when you're running a playtest, is don't be a cheerleader. You are an observer. Okay, that's the O word in here. I've seen people run playtests where they're like, isn't this great? Oh, this card is so cool. Oh, you just swung on a chandelier and flew over this person and kicked them in the head and they fell over and hit this table and knocked this other person. It's not your job to have the players have fun. You don't come in the box. Okay. You want to sit and see if that fun develops on its own.
Oh now, my goodness, I'm so glad I've never experienced that, because I would be so uncomfortable.
Oh, really? No, I've been in many play tests, and I've caught myself doing it sometimes too, where you just try to jazz it up. Now, to flip that on its head, right? If I'm pitching to a publisher, I'm totally cheerleading the game. Right. Yes. That's very different than a playtest. When you're playing
now,
with
I
a
see
publisher,
what you mean.
You're not you're not yet. Now I can cheerlead it and say, "Oh my God!" I slam my card down on the table. "Ha! I got you with this one," or whatever. Right. And you can make people, because we just talked about game. Playing a game is group dependent. And if you're demoing it to a publisher, you're part of that group, right? And so you can make it be more fun for everybody. And it's fine if you're at a convention and you're trying to sell your game to a publisher or at a table to people walking by or whatever. By all means, use those theatrical skills that you work so hard on. But when you're play testing, you're just a fly on the wall and you want to
switch that off
if it comes by itself.
Now, yes, I see what you mean, because that it is very tempting to try and sort of be like, see, wasn't that fun? Didn't you love that? And people are like, I mean, I did, but now I feel weird about it
Yes.
because you've made all this stuff about it. But
You
yes,
made it weird,
when
Jeff. Stop making it weird.
yeah, like I'm going to go now. In terms of actually using all these notes in the iteration, like using the notes themselves, I think what's really interesting is not just using what you've just done, but actually referring back to previous versions. So one of the things George did a panel earlier today on iteration, and George and I both come from a software development background. So we both look at iteration and versioning very seriously, and we're able to roll back if we need to because we've kept the versions of everything. So if we've implemented something and it sucks, we can just roll back to the previous version very easily. And that's, I think, one of the things that's really interesting to do is if you start hitting a wall and you go, this used to be fun, but now I don't like how it feels. We seem to have come away from the vision somehow and we're in this weird place. If you've got your older notes, you can actually roll further back. So what I mean by roll back, in case people aren't familiar with the expression, is when you put in a change to software, you have all of the elements of that change labeled in such a way that if anything breaks when you make that change, you can pull those changes out and return it to the previous state. So it takes out anything it broke, hopefully, and then you're still running on what was previously stable. So that's what I aim to do in a lot of cases with games, or even just if like, oh, it stopped being wonderful, but I remember it being wonderful in version 0.3, and now I'm in, version 1.7. What was it about 0.3? And sometimes that just reminds you of what your vision used to be for the game, and you go,
Sure.
oh, that's right, it's meant to have mushrooms in it. Oh, and you just
and you never know where you're gonna, with this iteration, you do step by step by step by step by step, right? And every change kind of makes sense, and then you look back, and sometimes you end up in a place where you never could have even envisioned from the start. But a lot of times, it's good to go back and look at some of those earlier, because you become so separated from where, like you were saying, where do we start with this? What was some of the earlier ones? And you can graft this new thing, which is now so totally different than kind of where you were in the beginning, but there were still elements earlier that you kind of forgot about, and bring those together, and it can be really powerful sometimes.
Also, sometimes those things broke earlier, didn't work, but you loved them, but you had to take them out because they weren't working. And now you've made all these other changes and they make sense again.
Mm-hmm.
So like you can sometimes put things back in. That's why I tend to use the concept of vision for my game. I don't always write it down explicitly, but I often write a paragraph or so of the game idea. And I go back and check against that because I can remember how I felt when I wrote it. And I see whether this game still feels like that. And if it doesn't, is that okay? And if it's okay, cool, the game has evolved. And if it's not okay, then I know what I need to do.
Yeah. I'm so happy to hear you say that. I 100% do that. That's the first, whenever I have that flash of inspiration, it could be a mechanic, it could be an experience, it could be whatever, right? But something got me jazzed enough to actually start working on a game. And I want to capture that, kernel of inspiration. And so I write down the same thing. I write one or two paragraphs, put it aside. And when I get lost in the woods, and I will get lost in the woods, that I bring that back out and like, why did I think this was going to be fun? What the heck was I, what was it? And
why
that,
did I
that
even do
helps.
this?
Yeah. And that helps kind of reignite that. It's like, oh yeah, right.
Yeah,
That was the
sometimes it can
kernel.
be as little as like one sentence. My wonderful patient husband often gets me almost asleep next to him saying, "Oh, owls in the attic, walnuts." And he just goes, "Uh-huh," and he sends me the message. And in the morning I wake up and I go, "Owls in the attic, walnuts? What? Oh, the game idea. Oh, thank you." And off I go. But otherwise, that's gone. It's like gone. So yeah, if you don't have a husband who will message you things, I don't know what to help you with. But it's another way of taking notes.
Okay.
So yeah, structured note taking is very useful for some people. I use structured iteration processes, but I don't use structured notes. Would you like to talk about the fail faster format?
I'm not as familiar with that. I will leave that to you.
Okay. I have
I mean,
experimented with it.
I know Jay's stuff, but I
Yes,
have
yes,
not used it.
it's very good, and
This
a
is
lot of
from
people
Jay
find it really useful.
Cormier
Yes,
or
Jay
Cormier?
Cormier,
Yeah,
Cormier. I'm not sure which one he
I
uses.
apologize. I don't know how to pronounce it either.
But yes, so I mean, your average sort of structured note kind of format would be things like um, what you're trying to achieve, how you achieved it. Very much, if you wanted to just use this presentation as the starting point to make your notes structured around your iterations, I think you would be in a good place. Fail Faster does a lot of that for you. If you're someone who likes journaling, if you're someone who likes filling in forms, filling in questionnaires, if you like being given a format to follow to help you figure things out, Fail Faster is excellent. And even if you don't, it's a really good resource to have in your head. So I have read the Fail Faster journal. I have never used it because it doesn't work with the way my brain works. Nothing wrong with it, just something that my brain doesn't do. I know people who absolutely swear by it and get hysterically excited when they get a chance to get another Fail Faster journal because Jay has very generously donated them to several of the events I've been at, and I have had people literally sprint to get a copy. So it is a very valuable resource if that's how your brain works.
Yeah, and I see someone posted the link in the chat,
Yes.
so thank you for that.
Thank you kindly.
Yeah, and the last thing is just, I guess, would be more generally put in working with a co-design publisher of the idea of a developer. So this is kind of a trusted partner that will help you, bring it to the next level. So it could be to the level of a co-designer where, you're sharing the vision together and working together on it. And, sometimes you'll both observe the same playtest, or you'll split up and playtest separately and then reconvene. Both of those things can be valuable, and trying different things and going over the notes with somebody. It can also be useful to go over notes with publishers. Just because you sign the game with a publisher does not mean that the design work is done. Oftentimes it means it's just beginning. And a lot of that can be because publishers may have very specific, I've had games where I had like a 2-player only game, and I signed it like under the condition that it would go up to 4 players. And so I had to go back and redo that, or they like the basic concept, but they want to tweak it here and there. And a lot of times they'll work, you go off and play test on your own, or they'll maybe run some play testing in their internal development team, and you'll come back together and kind of iterate over that. So sometimes it can be really useful to present the notes, or to a trusted partner or developer, or even a third party, and say, look, this is what I'm thinking about changing. Does this make sense to you? And just get that kind of feedback before you iterate of getting another opinion of like, hey, here's an idea, or is this really seem like it's tackling what I saw?
This is one of the places where a structured note-taking structure makes a lot of sense, because if you have things being passed back and forth between different people, if you have multiple people involved in the decision-making process and things like that, it is very useful, particularly to use some kind of application to support this. Workflows, passing things back and forth and having it trackable by everyone, having it accessible by everyone. So like the easy end of that is just a Google Doc or a spreadsheet that you can all access online. And you can continue through that to like full on software development or iterative support networks of some sort. You could use things like Slack to capture all your conversations so that everyone can see that and you have a conversation in there. You can use, I can't remember what they're called, but Trello or things like that, or ClickUp. So there are lots of ways that you can do this, but you need to be very disciplined, I'm going to say, about that, because if you're working in a team and you're the one who's not doing your tasks, passing on the information, sharing updates, and so on, you're blocking the development of the game. So make sure that you choose things that everyone's comfortable using.
Okay. We've got about 5 minutes left here. So if you have any questions, please put them in the chat now. We will continue, but we will stop and answer questions. I think we're getting close to the end here. I think we've timed this perfectly, just like we practiced it. So my advice that I always like to give is kind of a 2-parter advice. So first is always listen to your playtesters and what they're telling you. And then the other piece of advice is never listen to your playtesters and what they're telling you. And what I mean by that is that, you know, the feedback that you're getting is important, and you should, you know, kind of take it in, but you don't have to accept everything that your playtesters are telling you to do, particularly if you're testing with designers who are trying to redesign it for you. Because they want to play, maybe the game you designed is not the game they want to play, right? They want to
Yes.
play a different game than what you've designed. So you don't have to blow in the wind with every little critique or suggestion or something. If it doesn't fit with your vision, it doesn't fit with your vision, right? And but on the other side, if you're getting the same thing over and over and over again, or you want your game to be an hour, but it's consistently taking people 2 hours, listen to the playtesters. Do that, right? So it's not, you don't want to be in a situation where you're just like, like I said, just caught in a breeze where anybody says something and you immediately throw a card out or redo it or make it more points or whatever. You're the designer, right? You're the filter for the information that you're getting and deciding how that's going to modify your design. That's that orient and decide part of the loop. That's why that's so important.
The way that, just quickly before we address that question, the way that I look at this is playtesters are absolutely excellent at finding problems and have nothing whatsoever to do with finding the solution.
Yes, that's an excellent way of putting it. Yeah, they'll tell you what's wrong and they'll all offer solutions,
of course,
but you ultimately are going to be the one that's going to come up with the solution.
You get to, yeah. So is there a good way to tell if feedback is coming from issues with your game versus a playtester who may just not like that type of game? From my perspective, I find this particularly difficult when I can't see them. So that's one of the other reasons I don't like testing online, because it makes it very hard for me to understand what they're really saying. But as someone whose job is to ask questions, generally what I do is I try and ask what the problem is. I try and find that out, and you don't say like, oh, really? Where's this coming from? If they say, I don't like this, tell me about that. What does it feel like? What is it that you don't like about it? How is it challenging you? All those sorts of things. And they will often say things like, oh, well, I hate this kind of game anyway, but, all those things. And they tend to out themselves. But if you're not sure, it's really a case-by-case thing, right, Jeff?
Yeah, I don't think there's any kind of magic question. I mean, most, if as a designer, I'll kind of introduce, what the game is and stuff like that. But if you listen to people, what they're saying, if their complaint is like they feel like a card is underpowered or they felt something was confused or something like that, that's going to be separate from the type of gamer that they are, or the type of game that they like. If they say, yeah, I didn't have fun. I wanted to stop Sally from doing this, but I didn't have any tools to take her down, then okay, that's not the type of game this is, right? And you don't say that out loud, but I'm just saying, you say, no, well, okay, well, that's fine. They weren't just into the vibe of the game, where it was just more of a race and it wasn't about, a take that kind of a thing. And some people like more take that, and that's fine. So it's, again, you got to kind of put it in context, but there's no magic question or thing that you're going to do. It's just observational skills.
And it is difficult to avoid saying things like, well, this isn't that kind of game, so your feedback's wrong. Like, no matter how you say that, it's going to sound like that to them.
Yeah, I would never say
so, even if you're like, oh, thank you.
I would just say, okay, thank you. Thank you for that feedback.
It's however you say, it's not that kind of game or anything like that, though. They will hear you're wrong. And so that's one of the lessons that I learned.
Right. Just don't say, if they say, there wasn't any, I really wanted some take that stuff so that we could drag the other players down or whatever that we're leading. And then just say, okay, thank you.
Oh, thank you for letting me know.
Okay. Look at us like pros, 4:30 on the dot. We end up on the last slide.
Yeah. Oh, I forgot to put my
contact information
stuff in there. Yeah.
You're a cipher.
I'm Drea Ink on all the things. It's actually very easy to find. So just Drea Ink, the way it says on my name there. Just look that up basically on everything and you'll find me.
Yeah.
J-Rink on all the things. Yep.
Yep, that's me on Twitter and Blue Sky. And also I'll mention that I have a blog on Substack called GameTech, GameTek. So if you just search over on Substack for that, you should find it. Which comes out irregularly, typically around every 2 weeks, or as the mood strikes me. So
fair. All right. Well, I think we've kind of
are there any other last
cover.
questions? Otherwise,
I'm just going to check my notes and see if there's anything else I wanted to cover.
Oh, very clever. I like that.
And I think I did everything. I think the only other thing that I wanted to vaguely mention is that very occasionally you can use note-taking as a shield. So if you are in a situation where someone won't stop talking at you about something, you can simply say, "Thank you so much. I've written that down. I appreciate your time."
The old pretend to write it down.
Well, you can actually write it down too, but once you have taken the notes, sometimes that's all they need.
Okay.
So,
and now you've learned all our techniques. So next time you're playtesting a game with us, you know exactly what to do to annoy us as much as possible.
Oh, no.
So we've given you all the tools.
All right. Well, I think that's us. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day and all of the NunPub stuff. And catch us on the internet somewhere, I guess.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody.